guys, I am Crystal, and I am back with part 3 of Trooper Proctor's text messages and cross examination because we're just going to go through all of it. Now, I've recorded this earlier thinking that I only had about an hour to an hour and a half left, and it turned out to be a whole lot longer than I thought. So I am breaking this up into part 3 and 4 and maybe even a 5 because I'm trying to keep these right around an hour or less, and it turned out to be a whole lot longer than I thought. So anyway, we're going to go ahead and get started with part 3 with Trooper Proctor's text messages and cross-examination by Alan Jackson.
Tab 2 in the binder in front of you. Can you take a look at the face page of what's under tab 2 and tell me if you recognize that?
Yes, sir. It's the private text thread with high school friends.
And this includes 9 chat participants that you engaged with?
That's correct.
Those participants include people by the name of Bird, Whitey, and Doc, correct?
Correct.
And then there's some other folks in there. They're identified by at least the last 4 digits of their phone number, correct?
Yes.
So this is a group text or a group chat with you and 8 of your high school friends about this investigation, correct?
Yes.
Trooper Proctor, you never thought when you were engaged with these other 8 individuals that this particular set of chats would ever become public, did you?
No, I did not.
I want to take a...
And I will say, this is very unusual. I don't know that I've ever seen another case where the lead investigator's personal text messages have been entered into evidence. And my understanding is that the reason they are able to enter these as evidence is due to the FBI investigation. But he is correct. He never imagined that these would be public knowledge one day. Some people can use that as an excuse. Well, these were all meant as a joke. He never thought they would be public. But doesn't that go even more to his character? Because he never thought they would be public. If he would have thought for 1 second they were going to be public, of course he would have changed the way he had said things. But yes, very, very, very unusual to get a lead detective's personal text messages into a trial.
Look at page 2527, if you could turn, that's on the bottom right of the document in tab 2. Do you have that page in front of you?
Yes, sir.
You recognize that this group chat was taking place on January 29th at about 10:52 p.m., correct?
Correct.
And the person that I'll identify as 5051, that's the last 4 digits of that phone number, indicates Chip, name of that BPD cop, correct?
Correct.
First of all, you indicated on Monday that you're Chip, is that right?
Yes, sir.
You responded at 10:53 p.m., John O'Keefe, is that right?
Yes, sir.
So you were willing to tell, just a few hours into an investigation of the death of a Boston police officer, you were willing to tell a bunch of high school buddies details about the investigation, including the name of the victim, correct?
At this point, it's 16 hours later, sir. Not a few.
16 is a few hours, correct? I'm not talking about days later.
It was about 16 hours later, sir.
Correct. And you identified John O'Keefe as the Boston police officer who was fallen in the yard at 34 Fairview, correct?
Correct.
You also informed, if you will skip to page 2529, you also informed these same folks, these same high school buddies that, quote, all the powers that be want answers ASAP, correct?
Yes.
You knew, Trooper Proctor, that there was brass that wanted this case wrapped up quickly and efficient. Isn't that right?
Objection.
Oh, well, is that what you were thinking?
No, the people wanted answers, sir.
They didn't just want answers. They wanted answers ASAP. What does ASAP mean?
That's as soon as possible.
Right. And you were texting this to your high school friends, again, 16 hours into this investigation, right?
Correct.
And you knew at that time, Trooper Proctor, that this was not going to implicate in any way, shape, form, or fashion another cop, correct?
Correct.
In this text exchange, let's turn to 2532, actually. You have that in front of you?
I do.
In this text exchange at 10:56 p.m., your buddy Bird writes, I'm sure the owners of the house will receive some shit, correct?
Correct.
How did you take that to mean? Did you take that to mean that he could get in trouble?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what my friend was getting at.
Well, you had some idea.
Yeah, maybe.
The owners of the house isn't going to get any shit for this, right?
That's how I interpreted it.
Yeah, you interpreted it like he's not going to get in any trouble. He's not going to be a suspect, correct?
Correct.
And he's not going to be implicated in any way. Is that right?
Correct.
And your answer was one word, correct?
Yes.
What was that word?
Nope.
And then you followed that up with an explanation as to why you said no, didn't you?
That wasn't the explanation why I said no. I simply said homeowner's a Boston cop too, meaning Mr. O'Keefe was a Boston cop. The homeowner was a Boston cop as well.
The question that preceded your answer of nope, the homeowner's a Boston cop too, was the homeowner's going to get some shit for this, correct?
That's not what I meant with that text.
That's what you wrote.
Not what I meant, sir.
All right, let's take it in order. Question. Oh goodness, the homeowner's going to get some shit for this. Answer, nope. Next text, he's a Boston cop too. That doesn't sound like an explanation for your nope.
No, that's just saying he's a Boston cop as well, Mr. O'Keefe.
And that's why he's not going to get any shit, correct, Trooper Proctor?
Well, he's not going to receive any shit, sir, because Mr. Albert, the homeowner, had nothing to do with Mr. O'Keefe's death.
And you knew this 16 hours into your investigation.
Yes.
Less than a day.
Yes.
16 hours after talking to Brian Alberts once, I believe, at this point. Not even an interview. I would not even call it an interview. He decided the homeowner had nothing at all to do with it. And let's think about this 16 hours for a minute, because he keeps saying, well, this was 16 hours later. Well, at the time of these texts, he's at home. Now, we don't know how long he's been home, but he's at home. So his mind was made up well before the 16 hours. Not that 16 hours is very long anyway, but it's obvious his mind was made up. This homeowner, who is a Boston cop also, was not going to be investigated, period. Nobody from that house was going to be investigated because his mind was made up after interviewing. I don't even like to call it an interview because it was more of a we talked to. It wasn't an interview. They talked to Jid McCabe, Carrie Roberts, and Brian Alberts. That's it. It's aggravating.
To your satisfaction.
To my satisfaction
And
and
you
to the
haven't
members
been
of my
to the
unit.
crime scene?
So let him finish. We didn't get that. Finish your answer.
To my satisfaction and to all the members of my unit who investigated that day.
Objection. Calls for speculation.
So I'm going to let it stand. Trooper Proctor, you have to keep your voice up, okay? Jurors need to hear you way back there.
Yes, ma'am.
The fact of the matter is, you hadn't been to the crime scene by the time you wrote this text, correct?
Correct.
You hadn't been inside the home, correct?
No.
You had questioned a grand total of 3 recipient witnesses at this point, correct?
Yes.
And 2 of the 3 were named McCabe, right?
Correct.
And 1 of the 3 was named Albert, correct?
Yes.
And it's against that backdrop that you wrote, nope, the homeowner's not going to get any shit because he's a cop, right?
That's not what I meant by that.
At 10:57, Bird goes on to write,
We do know that's what he meant by that, don't we? I believe that is exactly what he meant by that. It's not rocket science. You can read the text messages and tell exactly what he meant. He meant that the homeowner is a Boston cop also. What else would that mean? Oh, okay. No, he's not going to take any shit. There's no other way to interpret that.
the homeowner must have been a puddle to accomplish that. And then he writes, who's the homeowner? Then he writes, I hope not, but I can see it. Correct?
Yes.
A puddle means drunk, correct?
That's a term for it, yes.
In other words, Bird wrote that the homeowner must have been so drunk, so wasted to have killed him. Correct?
Objection.
Do you know what that means? Do you know what that text means?
Just the puddle part, Your Honor. The term, that term.
All right, so he can answer that.
And the puddle part means drunk or wasted, right?
Yes.
And what Bird actually wrote was he must have been a puddle to accomplish that. Correct?
That text is really confusing to me. First, I had no idea what puddle meant. I've never heard puddle used to describe somebody as drunk. So that was a first for me. But I don't know if there's text messages that we're not getting. So if there's stuff in between this that we're not getting, because it does seem a little out of context for me. He must have been a puddle to accomplish that. And I see where Jackson's going with it. And I understand why Jackson's going there. But as an independent thinker, I am trying to look at it as, okay, what else could he have meant by that? Because I'm not sure I'm buying that that's what he meant. He must have been a puddle to accomplish that. So meaning he must have been drunk to accomplish that. I feel like we're missing something else in here to give it more context, but I completely understand why Jackson's going with the process he's going with, meaning to accomplish meaning to murder John O'Keefe. He must have been drunk. I don't know. I don't know that I'm getting that from that text message, but we'll continue because it's been several days since I've heard this, and I have already forgotten everything that comes next. So anyway, just thought I'd throw that in there.
That's what he wrote.
And then you write back, quote, she waffled him. I looked at his body at the hospital, right?
Correct.
You used the phrase waffled about a Boston police officer who had fallen in the snow and died in someone's yard. And you decided to use the word waffled him, correct?
Objection.
So sustained. Ask it differently, Mr. Jackson.
Did you answer, she waffled him, I looked at his body at the hospital?
I did answer that, yes.
And then Bird questioned, she waffled him, correct?
Yes.
And then you responded, he was banged up. Is that right?
Yes.
Then a person with the phone number 0095 wrote, I thought he was drunk. Did he get beat up? You see that?
I do.
And you wrote, no. Is that right?
Correct.
Yet again, this is before 11 o'clock at night on January 29th, 2022, some 16 hours into your investigation. Is that right?
Yes.
So before you ever went to the crime scene, before you ever went into the house, only having interviewed 3 folks, you had this case nice and wrapped up, didn't you?
Yes. Based on the evidence my office uncovered that day, the one shoe discovered at the scene, the one shoe at the hospital, Mr. O'Keefe's injuries, the broken taillight pieces underneath the snow.
Super Proctor, I didn't ask for information. I asked, did you, in your mind, have this case wrapped up? Was it cut and dry in your mind?
Yes.
Bird then.
It was cut and dry in his mind. It was cut and dry. Within 16 hours, it was cut and dry. We have been listening to this trial for, well, at this point, I'll just go at this point when he is testifying, 23 days, right? We're on day 23 at this point of his testimony. There is nothing cut and dry that I have seen so far. If it was cut and dry, I wouldn't be leaning towards not guilty. Let me take that leaning part out, because the first several weeks of the trial, I was leaning towards not guilty, okay? But I was still very open to the prosecution convincing me that she is guilty. You know, that's how I go into every case. Every case, I don't care who it is, we are supposed to see them as innocent until proven guilty. So I have been waiting for the prosecution to prove that she is guilty. I don't see it. I was leaning towards not guilty. I'm not even leaning anymore. I am all the way on not guilty. So how is this cut and dry? If this was so cut and dry, then they would have done everything properly. You know, he's talking about the evidence here. Well, if we'll remember, we got to go way back in the trial. If we'll remember, you know, they had the leaf blower out and found some evidence. Now, if you'll remember at the beginning with the leaf blower, there was not near as much snow as what there is when they do the grid search. And I believe that was like 8 hours later. And there was a lot more snow at that point. But using the leaf blower, they were able to find drops of blood, which let's not forget they collected in red Solo cups and put in a Stop and Shop bag, okay? With no chain of custody. Let's not forget about the chain of custody, because that's important in any case. No chain of custody here. They found with the leaf blower, right? Because apparently that is a new investigative tool, is to use a leaf blower. But hey, whatever. They also found a piece of, or I think part of the clear drinking glass, but they weren't able to find the shoe, and they were not able to see any red taillight. That boggles my mind a little bit, because you're at that point, they are actually looking for evidence. That's why they got the leaf blower, right? And they could not find red taillight in white snow. It doesn't add up for me. I'm sorry. It does not add up for me. I need more before I can send somebody to prison for the rest of their lives. And I'm not seeing it. And the fact that he decided all of this within 16 hours, if we just go by the times that he texted, that's 16 hours. I believe he made this decision in a lot less time than 16 hours. Probably within an hour. Once he knew it was Brian Albert's home is when that decision was most likely made in his mind, and he was never willing to look anywhere else. He had not even been to the crime scene yet.
Writes, so the owner of the house was a woman. Sorry, was a woman cop that beat him, question mark, right?
Yes.
And then you wrote, that's what I initially thought after talking to Canton paramedics. Is that right?
Yes.
And then you said,
Why did he think that after talking to Canton paramedics? Is it possibly because it looks like he has been beat?
that I saw the guy, correct?
Correct.
So what you meant by that, Trooper Proctor, was according to you, based on your conversations, your initial conversations with the paramedics, the first responders, you were under the impression that this was a beating death. He'd been beaten to death, correct?
The way it was given to me, sir, was
That's yes or no?
medical.
That's yes
No,
or no?
he's going to answer the question. If you want
Go
to
ahead.
withdraw the question, you can.
No, go ahead.
We entered this investigation with an open mind. It was given to me as a medical situation. And when we saw Mr. O'Keefe's body at the hospital with Sergeant Buchanan and I, we saw his injuries and we were kind of working through how these injuries occurred.
As a matter of fact, both you and Sergeant Buchanan believed that he had suffered the injuries as a result of a physical altercation based on information you received from the paramedics initially, correct?
Initially, we didn't know what we had. We knew there was some significant injuries to Mr. O'Keefe. And we're still figuring out how those injuries occurred.
Well, you just testified. Initially, we didn't know what we had.
Right.
But 16 hours after the fact, you wrote the following sentence. That's what I initially thought after talking to Canton paramedics, correct?
Correct.
So initially, you did think you knew what you had, a physical altercation leading to a death, correct?
Correct.
So when you just said, initially we didn't know what we had, that wasn't quite true. You did at least have an idea of what you thought you had, correct?
Objection.
Sustained.
All right. You were aware, initially, that John O'Keefe had suffered a 2-inch laceration to the back of his head, correct?
Yes.
That resulted in a skull fracture, correct?
Correct.
He had a laceration over his right eye, small laceration just under the eyebrow, correct?
Yes.
Had a laceration on his nose, is that right?
Correct.
He had patterned scratches on his right arm, abrasions, scratches, correct?
Yes.
And he had no injuries below the neck.
Not that I observed, sir.
Not a single broken bone, correct?
Not that I was aware of.
Not a single fracture, correct?
Not that I was aware of.
Not a single bruise below the neck, right?
Not that I observed.
Looks a lot like a physical altercation, doesn't it?
Objection.
Sustained.
I know he can't answer that because it was sustained, but I really would have liked to have known just a yes or no answer because it does sound like a physical altercation to me. You know, we still haven't heard from the ME, and I got a feeling when we do, because we have to, right? I mean, you have to hear from the ME. They have to establish cause of death. And despite what some of these troopers are testifying to, they don't have a medical degree. They really should not be testifying to cause of death or anything of that nature. So I'm really curious what the ME is going to say on direct, and then I'm curious on cross if she is going to stand firm that it was a car accident, because I agree, it does not look like he was hit by a car. It does look, and you know, I know that falls in line with the conspiracy, but I'm just calling it like I see it. It looks like he was beat up, like he was in a physical altercation. It does not look like a car accident. The only injuries are from the head up. So how did the car strike him in just his face? That makes no sense to me whatsoever. And the prosecution, Lally, has not been able to explain any of that. He hasn't even tried because we haven't even heard from the ME.
Bird writes, Bear, let's focus, correct?
Yes.
Who's Bear?
That's another nickname I have.
0095 writes, what does she waffled him mean? And then Bird writes, what's the story, correct?
Correct.
And you wrote, she hit him with her car. Is that right?
Yes.
Have you ever seen, in your experience, have you ever seen a pedestrian who's hit by a 6,000-pound car with no bruises? Ever.
The pedestrian strikes I've seen have been at high speeds,
And that's
60
enough
plus.
a person out of his shoe, right?
60 plus miles per hour. So I can't recall off right now, off the top of my head, as far as injuries in the past pedestrian strikes I've attended.
Okay. So someone, you indicated on Monday, under examination by Mr. Lally, you've seen a shoe missing,
Correct.
pedestrian strikes, correct?
Yes.
Those are high speed, extremely high speed incidents, correct?
Yes.
60 plus miles an hour, right?
I can't recall all the pedestrian strikes I've been to as far as the miles per hour the vehicle is traveling.
So, Proctor, let me ask you the question again. Have you ever, yes or no, have you ever in your experience seen a vehicle pedestrian incident in which the pedestrian has no bruises?
Objection.
Have you seen that?
I can't recall.
Next question.
After you wrote, she hit him with her car, 5051 writes, oh, Jesus. And Bird writes, okay, that's fucked up, correct?
Correct.
And then you wrote what?
Intentional or not?
Intentional or not? Is that right?
Yes.
Your words.
Correct.
0095 then chimes in.
Intentional or not? So I'm guessing in that text message, he's saying that's fucked up, whether it was intentionally done or not intentionally done. So I guess 16 hours into it, he knew 100% that she did it, but what he didn't know is whether it was intentional or not. That may be kind of what I'm getting out of that right there. So then that makes me question, when did they decide it was intentional? Because I believe when she was originally charged, it was charged with manslaughter. If she was originally charged with manslaughter, at some point it was they upped it to second degree murder. So if it was originally charged at manslaughter, at some point, and because I didn't follow this case before the trial started, I have no idea when, but at some point it was up to second degree murder, which means they have to show intent. To get a guilty verdict on second degree murder, they have to show that she intended to do bodily harm and kill him. How did they get the intent? Because there's been times in the beginnings of the trial that I could go back and forth on, maybe it was an accident. I don't know. But now I can't even really get to manslaughter anymore. And I really can't get to second degree. So I'm just curious, in that text message, intentionally or not, it sounds to me like at that point, they didn't know whether it was intentional or not. So I want to know what changed to make them believe it was intentional.
And gotcha. He was frozen in the driveway and she didn't see him? Question mark. Correct?
Correct.
And you wrote what?
That's another animal we won't be able to prove.
That's another animal we won't be able to prove. Correct?
Correct.
Trooper Proctor, you knew that there were going to be things in this case, even 16 hours into this, that you just admitted you would have zero proof of. Correct?
Objection.
Sustained. You can ask it differently.
Did you mean by that statement that this was one of several things that you knew we would not be able to prove?
That statement, that's another animal we won't be able to prove, references the intentional or not part.
You didn't care at that point when you wrote that, you didn't care what you could or could not prove, did you?
Objection.
I'll allow it.
Isn't that what you meant?
No.
You had a narrative that you had developed and you would pursue it no matter what the proof was. That's what you meant by that statement, correct?
Objection.
Sustained. You can ask it differently.
Did you mean by that, thank you, Your Honor, I didn't mean to step on your words. Did you mean by that statement that you were going to pursue this case no matter what the proof might be?
What I meant by that statement was if Miss Reed backed into Mr. O'Keefe intentionally or not.
Interestingly, though, that statement came on the heels of he was frozen in the driveway and she didn't see him. And you wrote in response to that question, that's another animal we won't be able to prove. Correct?
That's not what I was responding to. I was responding to the intentional or not part.
So you're responding to your own statement.
Correct.
Okay. 0095 then writes, what's the name of the Canton cop living in Canton? The other one involved. Correct?
Yes.
In other words, that person was asking, tell me the name of the homeowner. Isn't that right?
Yes.
The guy that's the cop, right?
Correct.
And you ignored that question for a second time. Is that right?
Yes.
As a matter of fact, not one time, not once in this entire group chat did you disclose the name Brian Albert, did you?
I don't believe so, no.
You were actively trying to hide Brian Albert's name, at least from this conversation.
Objection.
I'll allow it. Is that what you were trying to do?
Absolutely not.
But you had no problem sharing John O'Keefe's name with your buddies from high school, right?
Correct.
And you had no problem sharing Karen Reed's name with your buddies from high school, correct?
I don't believe I named the defendant.
Not yet, you didn't. Later in the chat.
Okay. I think I've discussed this in one of my previous, I don't remember if it was one or two of these text message videos. But one of the things that absolutely drives me crazy about this case, and has from day one pretty much, is the lack of respect given to John O'Keefe. From the very beginning of this investigation, there has been zero respect given to this man, the victim, the one who was found dead, the one who they are supposed to be investigating his murder. And it's like nobody respects him. Now, they all talk about what a wonderful guy he was and commend him for taking on his niece and nephew, but then they just dropped the ball so bad on this investigation that, even if Karen Reed did do it, it's most likely they will never receive justice. His family will most likely never receive justice. Now, juries are unpredictable, and I have no idea how they're leaning, but if they're watching it like the rest of us are watching it, I know they don't get all the outside noise. But in the beginning, I didn't have any outside noise either, and I was still leaning towards not guilty. So if they find her not guilty, most likely there is never going to be justice in this case, because they're not going to keep investigating it. They're not going to put somebody else on trial for his murder. That rarely ever happens. I can't even think of one off the top of my head. Once somebody is found not guilty, that's it. Because you know what? If they put somebody else up, guess what their defense is going to be? A lot of this same stuff that Karen Reed is using. How bad the investigation is. Only this time, they're going to be able to include, well, you didn't even think it was our client. You guys arrested somebody else. Somebody else went to trial for this. Most likely because of how bad they messed up this case, his family is never going to receive justice. And that is sad.
Okay, correct.
5051 then writes, the BPD have any jurisdiction here because it was their own? Question mark. Is that right?
Yes.
And a few texts later, if you look down a few texts, at about 11 o'clock, you see a text that starts nah, cat.
I do, sir, yes.
You responded, quote, nah, N-A-H, nah, cat, K-A-T-T. It's the total opposite. They have to recuse themselves. Same with Canton, correct?
That text ends as they have to recuse themselves.
You then text back, I'm sorry, can I have a moment?
Yes.
What did I say?
I see where you're at, sir.
How did you end that text?
Same with Canton.
Meaning Canton has to recuse itself also, correct?
That was my understanding.
So by 11 p.m. on January 29th, 2022, there was no question in your mind, Trooper Proctor, that the Canton Police Department was recused from this investigation in all particulars, correct?
That they had taken a step back from participating, yes.
Right. Well, there's one way to put it. They've taken a step back from participating. Another way to put it is they recused themselves completely, correct?
Correct.
They were not going to be, at least in your mind, they were not to be involved in any way, just like Boston PD was not to be involved in any way. Is that right?
Objection.
Is that what you were thinking?
It was my understanding they were not going to be involved.
Now, if we could turn to page 2537. (5051) writes, but I assume you guys are out to make it cut and dry since it involves cops, correct?
Yes.
And Bird writes, something stinks, correct?
Correct.
And then Trooper Proctor, you responded, yeah, but there will be some serious charges brought on the girl. Isn't that right?
That's right.
So in that text exchange, you were saying, yeah, we're out to make it cut and dry, correct?
No.
You didn't write, yeah, we're going to follow the evidence wherever it takes us. You didn't, did you?
I did not write that.
You didn't write, yeah, we're going to make sure that we investigate this thing fully and thoroughly before making any decisions. You didn't say that, did you?
I did not.
You wrote, yeah, but there will be some serious charges brought on the girl. Isn't that right?
Correct.
And the reason you wrote that is because you knew, as the text above it says, this has to be cut and dry because it involves cops, right?
Objection.
I'm going to allow that. Is that the reason you wrote it?
No, Your Honor.
And then you indicated, we're going to put serious charges on the girl. Who did you mean by the girl, by the way?
The defendant.
Karen Reed?
Yes, sir.
So the way that you were going to make it cut and dry, pretty simple. Just pin it on the girl, right?
Objection.
Is that right?
Absolutely not. Follow the facts and the evidence from that day on the 29th, and everything led to Miss Reed hitting Mr. O'Keefe with her vehicle.
But that wasn't the question that you were answering, was it? We're going to follow the evidence and make sure we do this thoroughly. The question you were answering was, I assume you guys, you, Trooper Proctor, and your team are going to, quote, make it cut and dry, since it involves cops, meaning Brian Albert, correct?
Incorrect. Doesn't matter to me if the homeowner's a cop, if the victim's a police officer. Myself and everyone in my office investigated this case that Saturday, had an overwhelming amount of evidence that Miss Reed struck Mr. O'Keefe. So it didn't matter to us what their occupation was.
We'll see. Let's keep reading, shall we? 5051, a little further down, says, gotta be, I could only imagine what internal affairs at BPD are trying to get out there. Correct?
Correct.
Meaning, this person, 5051, was opining, at least in your mind, you interpreted that as being Boston police are going to have a lot to answer for, given the fact that another Boston police officer was found dead on that officer's lawn. Correct?
Objection.
What were you thinking?
I can't speak to the mindset to that comment. I wasn't sure how to interpret that one.
All right, next question, Mr. Jackson.
Then 5051 changes gears, and he writes, she hot at least? Correct?
Yes.
And what was your response to that?
From all accounts, he didn't do a thing wrong. She's a whack job cunt.
From all accounts, he didn't do a thing wrong. She's a whack job cunt. That's what you wrote, correct?
Correct.
16 hours into this investigation.
16 hours. And he is calling her a whack job. See you next Tuesday. Without a doubt, somebody was in his ear talking about her. Was that Jen from the testimony we heard with her? That seems very likely. Was it Brian? I mean, because at this point, he's only really talked to 3 witnesses, correct? He's talked to the 2 McCabe's and Brian Alberts. But he, 16 hours into this, has just stated that she is a whack job. See you next Tuesday. There has to be a reason he has formed that opinion of her. And that, I believe, at this point, could have only came from one of the McCabe's or Brian Alberts, which kind of lets you know how influential they were in this investigation. If they have formed his opinion of her already, then they had a lot of influence on this investigation, or at least on him. And of course, let's remember, he is the lead detective.
Yes.
Into your objective and unbiased, thorough investigation, correct?
Correct.
But sir, you didn't have all accounts, did you?
What I meant by that was
Did you or did you not have all accounts in your investigation?
the accounts we had was Miss Reed struck Mr. O'Keefe with her vehicle, discovered taillight pieces at the scene. Those are the accounts we had.
The accounts
And
you had, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
The accounts you had, Trooper Proctor, were from 2 people named McCabe and 1 named Albert, who happened to be the homeowner and a Boston cop. Those are the accounts from recipient witnesses that you had, correct?
There was another additional witness that we had investigators had interviewed, Miss Roberts as well.
And from all accounts, he didn't do a thing wrong. That was your decision 16 hours into the investigation, correct?
Yes.
And the other decision that you made and the other determination you came to was my client, Karen Reed, was a whack job cunt, right?
Yes.
What else did you say in response to she's hot at least? Or she hot at least, question mark.
So following that text, I responded, yeah, she's a babe. Weird Fall River accent, though. No ass.
Yeah, she's a babe. Who's the she?
Miss Reed.
Weird Fall River accent, though. You talking about her, the way she talks?
The accent.
And no ass. Now you're talking about her body, or physique, correct?
Yes.
You think that's appropriate?
Absolutely not.
Then Bird chimes in with a little comedy. Not newsworthy then, correct?
Correct.
In other words, well, if she didn't have an ass, nothing to see here, correct?
Objection.
Sustained.
And then 5051 says, oh, she's skating, right?
Correct.
And what did you write after that?
My response was 0 chance she skated.
And then what did you write?
She's fucked.
0 chance she skates. She's fucked, right?
Correct.
You decided on the 29th of January, 17 hours into this investigation, you decided individually, Trooper Proctor, You're not only going to put it on the girl, you decided you're going to make sure this is cut and dry, and the way you're going to do it is to make sure that she's fucked. That's what you were saying.
Objection.
All right, so that's sustained. The content's fine. You have to ask it differently.
17 hours into this investigation, Trooper Proctor, you made the decision that you were going to put it on Miss Reed, didn't you? Put the case on Miss Reed. She was going to catch the case, correct?
No, absolutely not.
What did you mean then when you said she's fucked?
After the day's investigation with multiple troopers conducting multiple tasks, debriefing at Canton PD amongst detectives in my office, we went through the overwhelming amount of evidence against Miss Reed that she struck Mr. O'Keefe with her vehicle. That's what I meant by that comment.
What you meant by that comment, Trooper Proctor, was you were going to make sure because 5051 had said she's going to skate. She's skating. When you said zero chance she skates, she's fucked. What you meant was, I am going to make sure Ms. Reed doesn't skate. She's fucked. That's what you meant, isn't it?
Objection.
Sustained.
And then Bird decides to chime in, good, no ass bitch, right?
Yes, that's what he wrote.
And how did you respond to Bird saying, good, no ass bitch?
I laughed.
Thought that was funny, did you? Trooper Proctor? Thought that was funny?
It was unprofessional of me. That's something I shouldn't have done.
Well, I think we all know it was unprofessional. There's a lot of things. I'm asking you, did you think it was funny?
No, according to my response at the time, apparently.
Then you said,
So his response to that was, according to my response, I thought it was at the time. Well, I don't care what he thinks about it now, because all of this goes to his frame of mind at the time. I'm sure he doesn't think any of this is funny right now because he's in the ringer. I mean, he probably doesn't think any of it's funny right now. But even he said at the time, well, all of these messages, every one of them, go to his state of mind at the time. That is what is important here, because you're getting his state of mind at the time of the investigation, 16 hours into the investigation. And I don't know why we keep calling it an investigation, because there wasn't an investigation. There was no investigation.
a picture just to add to it, to pile on, of Miss Reed being arrested, correct?
I don't. Not sure if that came from me, sir.
Let's skip to 2543. Are you there, Trooper Proctor?
Yes.
The date is now February 2nd, 2022. A person by the name of Doc writes, is that chick a smoke? Correct?
Correct.
Who's the chick?
Miss Reed.
And you write E-H, right?
Yes.
And then you write nutbag, as Chief would say, correct?
Correct.
Who's Chief?
A friend of mine.
And then you write what?
She's got a leaky balloon knot.
Trooper Proctor, explain to the jurors what a balloon knot is.
You're essentially, I guess, your rectum area.
Your anus?
Yes.
That's what you were referring to about Miss Reed?
Yes.
And you were making fun of her because you believed at that time that it leaked? That's how you were treating Miss Reed? Yes or no?
Yes.
And then you followed that up just to make sure you cleared up any mistake about what you meant with leaks poo, correct?
Objection.
All right, so I'm going to strike that. You can get this in, but do it the right way, Mr. Jackson.
You followed that up with the phrase leaks poo, didn't you?
I did.
Again, another reference to Miss Reed's medical issues and medical conditions, correct?
Correct.
Specifically focused on her anus, correct?
In reference, yes.
Were you aware at the time that you wrote this that Miss Reed had suffered a colectomy surgery, very serious surgery?
I was not, sir, no.
Were you aware that she had had 10 surgeries in 18 months, several years prior? 10.
I was not aware of that.
Were you aware that she had serious medical issues, gastrointestinal medical issues that she suffered when she was a victim of for years? Did you know that?
Objection.
Sustained.
But you decided that you're going to take another shot at her and talk about her anatomy
Okay, so this leads me to another question. I'm not going to rehash what he said about her medical condition. That's just awful. But what I want to know is, how does he have that information? How does he know this? It goes back to what I just previously said. Somebody has been in his ear, because how else would he know that information, right? He doesn't have her medical records. He doesn't know any of this. Somebody had to have told him these things, right? For him to know that. At this point, that text message was February 2nd, okay? So we are 2 days. 2 days later, we're no longer 16 hours. So 2 days later, he knows this information about her. Where? Where is he getting that information? Again, somebody has a lot of influence over him to have been able to fill his mind with these things about her that apparently are true. About her medical condition, let me say that, because I'm not saying anything else is true that he has said about her, but apparently she does have a medical condition that caused some of this of what he's saying. How did he obtain that information? How would he know that unless somebody is in his ear telling him these things that has influence over him, that has put the blinders on him, that the only person he can see as killing John was her? You know, somebody has put these blinders on him that he is not even willing to investigate or interview anyone from the house that John was going to. I'm really curious about that. How did he know this information? Because I do think wherever he was getting this information had a lot of influence on the way this investigation got conducted, or how it didn't get conducted.
You decided that you were going to take another shot at her and talk about her anatomy as a balloon knot, correct?
Objection.
Sustained.
At this point, Trooper Proctor, Miss Reed was just reduced to a punchline to you, wasn't she?
Objection.
Sustained.
Well, you weren't done yet. This chat doesn't end yet, does it?
No, sir.
Let's skip to 2543. On the same day, February 2nd, 2022, about 4:15 p.m., a person by the name of Whitey wrote, "What are you guzzling on?" Correct?
Yes.
And you wrote nothing, writing a warrant. Is that right?
Correct.
Whitey then shares some sort of a video, correct?
Yes.
You remember that video being of the 1980s band Warrant?
I don't recall the video he sent.
0095 laughed and then wrote, "Wait, why does her asshole leak?" Correct?
Yes, that's what he wrote.
And then what did Doc write in response to that?
Objection, Your Honor.
The objection sustained. I'll see you, Tybar. Take that down, please.
Without
that-
reference to,
Take that down.
without reference to the specifics of what was.
I'm going to see Counselor Tybar.
I sure would like to know what he said and why there are so many objections to it, even making a reference to it, that they're back at sidebar.
Trooper Proctor, without getting to the specifics of the words used in the following, in the next exchange that you're looking at, it's fair to say that your high school buddies then continue to discuss Miss Reed's medical issues, correct?
Objection.
That's sustained. Come on, Mr. Jackson. That isn't what you said you'd ask. Go ahead and ask the question you said you'd ask.
Was there a continued discussion that finished on this subject matter?
Yes.
On Monday, you indicated that your conduct in this case, and specifically your conduct as reflected in these messages, how did you put it? It did not affect the integrity of the investigation, of your investigation, correct? What you said to the jurors.
Correct.
You know what the definition of integrity is?
Doing the right thing when no one's looking.
It's the quality of being honest and having strong moral principles, correct?
Objection.
Sustained.
Do you believe that integrity means being honest and having strong moral principles?
I believe that's part of it as well.
Do you stand by that testimony that you were showing strong moral principles in this investigation, sir?
In the investigation part, absolutely. Through these text messages, absolutely not. They were juvenile and regrettable.
When you say they're juvenile and regrettable, it sounds like you're almost apologizing to the jury for your conduct. Is that what you're doing?
For those text. Objection.
Sustained.
Trooper Proctor, have you ever apologized to Miss Reed?
Objection.
Sustained.
As a lead investigator in this case, you were tasked with the responsibility of making sure that the investigation remained free of any conflicts of interest. As part of your job, correct?
Correct.
Throughout the pendency of this investigation, in this case, you've denied having any conflict of interest in this case. Isn't that right?
Correct.
In fact, a couple of months ago in February of 2024, you testified in a different proceeding. Is that right?
Yes.
And you testified under oath in that proceeding on February 1st that you did not know any members of the Albert family or McCabe family, correct?
Certain members of the Albert family I did not know. I know Chris and Julie and Colin. I don't know the McCabe's.
That wasn't my question. Did you testify? Let's take them one at a time. Did you testify under oath, same oath you took here today, in a former proceeding in February of 2024 that you did not know and did not have any relationship with members of the Albert and McCabe families? Did you?
I haven't had a chance to review those minutes. I've only had one opportunity to, and that was a couple months ago. So I would want to review those minutes in order to answer that accurately.
You can't remember how you testified, whether or not you knew or had relationships with the Alberts and McCabes?
Objection.
Sustained.
As you sit here right now, you need to refresh your recollection. You can't remember what you said.
Objection.
Do you remember what you said?
During that proceeding, no.
Would it refresh your recollection if you took a look at those grand jury minutes?
Yes.
What page, Mr. Jackson?
This is page 01563. Tell me I have just a moment, Your Honor.
Yes.
May I approach?
Yes.
If you'd review that and look up when you're finished. There you go.
Okay.
Did that refresh your recollection about a question and answer that you had, or a series of questions and answers that you had while you were testifying under oath in that other proceeding?
Yes, sir.
Objection. May we approach?
Yes.
You were asked the question, quote, did you communicate with First Assistant DA Beelan that you did not know and had no relation?
You are unmuted.
Mary, Your Honor?
Yes.
Thank you. You were asked the question, quote, did you communicate with First Assistant DA Beelan that you did not know and had no relationship with the Albert and McCabe families? And you answered, quote, to the best of my recollection, the same conversation took place with everyone I talked to about this because it's the same answer. It's the facts that I shared with everyone. Question, meaning you told First Assistant Beelan that you didn't know, didn't have a relationships with
Objection, Your Honor.
members of the Albert and McCabe families. Answer, correct.
Yes, that's true.
So your question is whether he said this?
Correct. Whether that's his testimony. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And that's your testimony that you, in fact, told members of the DA's office that you did not know and did not have a relationship with the Alberts or McCabe's. Is that right?
I did not know the McCabe's. I don't know most of the Alberts, and I have little to no relationship with Chris and Julie. So that's what I meant by that answer.
Well, the question wasn't, did you know most of the Alberts? The question was, did you have a relationship with, or did you know the Alberts? And your answer was no,
No, I don't have a relationship with the Alberts.
or know them.
I don't know the McCabe's. I don't have a relationship with the Alberts.
So you do know
You're
the Alberts, correct?
I know some of them, Julie and Chris.
And Colin, correct?
Correct, and Colin.
And you knew the Alberts when you gave this testimony in February of 2024. Is that right?
Yeah, they asked if there was any relationships.
And let's try this again. Meaning you told First Assistant Beelan that you didn't know, didn't have relationships with members of the Alberts and members of the Albert and McCabe families. Answer, correct.
Mhm.
Was that ambiguous in your mind?
The way I interpreted relationships was basically being like friends or, communications, frequent communications. That's how I interpreted
Well, that might have been a
relationships.
good time to pipe up and say, well, I know Chris and I know Julie and I know Colin, correct?
Objection.
Sustained.
That might have been a good time to answer the question, I know these three individuals from the Albert family, right?
Objection.
Sustained.
But your answer was one word, correct, right?
Yes.
You further testified that you never have gone to any supervisor at Massachusetts State Police to disclose even a potential conflict of interest in this case that you might have, correct?
Correct.
And you indicated the needs never come up. Is that right?
Correct.
You also told ADA Lally that you, quote, did not have relationships or know members of the Albert or McCabe families, correct?
Correct.
And that's just not true, is it? You do know members of the Albert family. Isn't that right?
It's different from having a relationship with people.
But what about part of the question, did not have relationships or know members of the Albert or McCabe families? How about that part of the question?
Well, that's lumped in with the McCabes. I don't know the McCabe family, sir.
I see. So what you did, Trooper Proctor, is you dissected the sentence. And where relationships are concerned, you ignore that in terms of the Alberts because you don't have relationships. Where no is concerned, you link that to the McCabes because you don't know the McCabes. That's what you did?
No.
So it's sustained. You can ask it. You can break it down, Mr. Jackson.
Not sure I can. I'll ask it a different way. How about if I just ask it this way? That was a lie, wasn't it?
No, absolutely not.
You stand by that testimony?
Yes.
That you don't know the McCabe, at the time that you testified, that you didn't know the Alberts or any members of the Albert family?
I don't have relationships with them.
Okay. My question is, you keep going back to relationships. I'm asking you, did you testify that you didn't know them?
Objection.
I'll let him have it. Do you understand the question, Trooper?
It was Chris, Julie, and Colin.
So if you were to say, I don't know any members of the Albert family, that would have been a lie, correct?
Objection.
Sustained.
Your Honor, this is the point at which I intend to turn to tab 3 and I believe the approach.
Okay. Jurors, feel free to stand.
Yeah, just a moment, Your Honor.
Yes.
Trooper Proctor, you've indicated that your sister is one of your best friends, maybe your best friend.
Yes.
Courtney Proctor, that's her name? Courtney
Correct.
Proctor, Elberg? And
I'm sorry?
her last name?
Elberg.
Elberg, with an L. And you're aware that she is also very, very good friends with Jillian Daniels, Julie Albert.
Correct.
Are you aware of any circumstance in which any of the Alberts have been over to your parents' house?
Yes.
Have you ever been over to your parents' house when any of the Alberts have been at your parents' house?
Yes.
Those Alberts include Chris Albert, Julie Albert, Colin Albert, correct?
Correct.
As a matter of fact, you were on or around January 29th, 2022, you were close enough friends with Julie Albert that she had your personal cell phone in her cell phone, correct? And vice versa.
I wouldn't classify us as close friends at all.
Okay, let me get back to my question. Did you have her cell phone in your phone and did she have yours?
I can't recall if I believe I had her stored in my phone.
So tab 4. All right, if you would turn to tab 4.
And what was this marked for ID?
This was,
Or tell me the numbers at the bottom.
oh, I've got the sheet right here. I've got a cheat sheet. Tab 4 is triple B, as in Bravo. And Your Honor, for the court, I'm looking at page 2625. You have that in front of you, sir?
Yes, sir.
Do you recognize the participants in this chat?
I do.
The number ending in 5374, you recognize it as being from Julie Albert?
Based off the content of the message, yeah, I recognize this text message from Julie.
And she texts, "This is the weekend I've been waiting for. Michael, please send ski videos if CP doesn't share with me," with a laughing face, correct?
Correct.
That text was sent on February 24th, 2022, wasn't it?
Yes.
That was less than a month after Mr. O'Keefe's death, isn't that right?
Correct.
And less than a month after you had been assigned to the investigation in which Julie Albert was a witness, correct?
Correct.
And her husband, Chris Albert, was a witness, correct?
Correct.
And her son, you knew, Colin, was involved as well, correct?
Yes.
Who is CP in that text message?
It's a nickname I have for my sister.
Courtney Proctor, correct?
Correct.
Your Honor, if I may have just a moment.
Okay.
Zoom time. C is in Charlie.
Yes.
This should be page 26. Do you have that in front of you, sir?
Yes.
And this would be page 2664. If you return to that page, please.
Okay.
Trooper Proctor, on January 19th, 2022, 10 days before Mr. O'Keefe's death, you were texting with your sister about whether Julie Albert might be available to babysit for your own son, correct?
Yes.
So in fact, your relationship with the Alberts was close enough that you would consider leaving your own child in the hands of Julie Albert as a babysitter, as a caregiver for your toddler, correct?
I wouldn't say close enough. I've hired babysitters that I've had out, but I don't know.
But Julie Albert was among them.
Yes, she was an option to watch my child.
And then you personally interviewed Julie Albert and Chris Albert in this case on February 10th, 2022.
Sergeant Buchanan and I did, yes.
And you didn't mention a thing about your relationship with Julie Albert, Chris Albert, or Colin Albert in any report that you ever drafted in this case, did you?
I did not.
Not one word, correct?
No, sir.
You interviewed Julie and Chris Albert at about 5:30 p.m. on the 10th of February, isn't that right?
Yes.
Did either of them, Julie or Chris Albert, mention that their son Colin Albert had been at 34 Fairview Road on the night in question, January 29th?
I'd have to reread the report to refresh my memory on their statements.
Well, let me ask it a different way. If I may have this. You wrote a report on October 12th, 2022, correct?
For which,
Concerning your interview with,
Why don't you show it to me?
I may have the wrong report. Do you recall, Trooper Proctor, ever mentioning that whether or not Julie and Chris mentioned to you that their son had been at 34 Fairview on January 29th? Do you recall that as you sit here?
to the best of my recollection, no.
It was a very short interview with Julie and Chris, was it not?
Typical length for the information they had to offer.
So you started the interview about 5:30 p.m. It must have been relatively short because you received a phone call by 6:17 from Julie Albert herself, correct?
I don't have the call detail record in front of me, but okay, yes.
Let's look at tab 6, please. Oh, it may not be in your book.
It's not, sir.
Okay, fair enough. You indicated that you might need to look at a phone record or a phone log to determine whether or not that call was made and what time it was made, correct?
If you have that,
May I
please.
approach you on?
Yes.
Thank you.
There's a highlighted portion to the Proctor. Focus your attention on that and let me know if that refreshes your recollection.
It does, sir. Thank you.
May I approach?
Yes.
After your interview, you received a phone call from Julie Albert about 6:17, 45 minutes after you began the interview and then left, correct?
Yes.
6:21, you called her back and you spoke for 3 minutes and 58 seconds. Is that right?
Yes.
Did you discuss the interview?
I don't recall the contents of that conversation.
And of course, you never memorialized that in any report, did you? The fact that you had a subsequent phone call with Julie Albert on your personal cell phone.
I did not.
Let's turn to tab 5 one more time. If you could turn to page 2677. Trooper Proctor, after your interview with Julie Albert, your sister, Courtney, texted you, "How did it go at Julie's? She was so nervous." You recall that?
Yes.
In fact, you responded to that with a ha, 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 ha. 4 ha's, right? And then why? Question mark. Correct?
Correct.
Then you responded, it was fine. Just a quick convo. Correct?
Yes.
You were literally reporting back to your sister about the progress of your investigation in a homicide investigation, weren't you?
Objection.
Sustained. You can ask it differently.
Were you reporting your progress to your sister about your investigation?
Objection.
Sustained.
So I just want to say right here, earlier when I talked about, I don't believe he conducted any interviews because I don't really think they were interviews. I think he confirmed it right there in his text message. It wasn't an interview. It was just a quick convo. That's all. It was just a quick conversation about what happened. It was not an interview. These people were never really interviewed. That may not be fair to say. Let me take that back a little bit, because when the FBI investigation came in, I do think other interviews were actually conducted. But in the beginning, the day of the incident and the days following, those weren't interviews. Those were just conversations. I do not believe those were actual interviews. I think they were just conversations, and that's where he gathered information about Karen Reed, because we've all heard the testimony. We've heard the testimony from Jen McCabe, from Carrie Roberts. They made it obvious they did not like her. I mean, Carrie apparently never liked her. That was the impression I got. Jen, it appears, seemed to pretend to be her friend. I mean, this is like the grown-up version of Mean Girls, is what all of the testimony early on reminded me of when it came to Karen Reed, is the adult version of Mean Girls. Pretend to be her friend, but in reality, they didn't like her. And so he's having these conversations with people that obviously did not like Karen Reed. And that's where he gained his knowledge about her. That is what I'm taking away from a lot of this. And so I think it was easy for them to influence his opinion. And maybe he really did believe Karen did it, but it wasn't based on his investigation because he never investigated. It wasn't based on the interviews he did because he did not interview anybody. I mean, the day of, he had some quick conversations, but they weren't real interviews. This is not how you conduct an investigation that is going to put somebody in prison for the rest of their life. We are going to go ahead and stop part 3 right here. Thank you guys for listening, and don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button.